Welcome back to The Bulwark Goes to Hollywood. My name is Sonny Bunch. I'm culture editor at The Bulwark. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by Brian Gewirtz, the author of There's Just One Problem, True Tales from the Former One-Time 7th-Most-Powerful Person in the WWE. Brian, thank you for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
As I said, the show's Bulwark Goes to Hollywood, and I feel like wrestling is a good way to think about Hollywood right now, just in terms of the mainstreaming of wrestling. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I want to go all the way back to the start of your story. How did Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson get you into the world of wrestling on a full-time basis? Because this is a fascinating story to me.
Yeah, thanks. It's just kind of a crazy string of unbelievable happenings, I guess, or not unbelievable happenings, but a lot of fortunate tales and mixed with a little nice little splash of nepotism at some points. Basically, I had wanted to be a sitcom writer since third grade. Watching my uncle Howard was a showrunner. He produced Taxi and Bosom Buddies with Tom Hanks and Wings, Larry Sanders, and that's something I always wanted to do. So when I graduated college, I went out to Hollywood as most of us did, graduating from Syracuse, and we did our thing, putting in our time, working as production assistants, and slowly making our way up the ranks. I was lucky enough to get on a show. Work on a couple shows as a writer, in my early 20s, one of them being Jenny McCarthy's sitcom, which my uncle was the showrunner on. So that's the first little dash of nepotism, but I'd like to think I earned it too, my writing partner and I, based on our previous credits. But unfortunately, the world wasn't really ready to see, Jenny McCarthy transition from crazy, wild, singled out gal to earnest Laverne and Shirley wannabe from Utica trying to make it in the world of Hollywood. So that show got canceled relatively quickly. And I was out of work for a while. My writing partner and I, we were writing spec scripts, doing a lot of meetings and stuff, but we weren't getting hired, as is the case often in Hollywood. Sometimes you're working on 3 shows in a row. Sometimes, you're not staffed for the season. So I was, toiling away, almost getting a job, as I write about, as a fast food spy for Jack in the Box. They had this ad in the LA Times where they basically wanted you to meet in a hotel airport. And then, if you get picked, and that's a big F, and there was a lot of clientele at that airport that was not going to get picked. So I consider myself an accomplishment for having made it past round 2. Essentially hiding in the bushes with a stopwatch, timing the drive-through, seeing if the bathrooms were clean. Everything that an aspiring writer has always dreamed of when heading out to LA. And then the second splash of nepotism and fortunate happenings occurred because my sister, who my uncle had helped get an internship at MTV through the Jenny connection, gave me a call and said she was interning at MTV and they were doing a bunch of SummerSlam specials in conjunction with WWE, WWF at the time. And they needed a writer for these specials. And I guess everyone at MTV in the summer, July of '99, was way too cool to have in-depth wrestling knowledge. So she knew that I was a big fan. So she called me. And again, it's I kind of jokingly say a splash of nepotism, but ultimately you got to do the work and you got to get hired on your own merit. So I wrote up a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of samples, whatever they requested. They looked it over. They hired me off of that. And then I came, I flew from LA right before I was supposed to start my first Jack in the Box fast food spy shift. So it was very disappointing. I never got to do that. But ultimately, the long about answer is I got hired by MTV to write these specials. One of them was the wrestling superstars, introduce their favorite music videos, which I asked MTV, oh, so these are the songs and the videos that these guys, gave to you? And they're like, no, we have no idea if they like these songs or even have heard of these artists, but you just need to write them in their own voice because these are the music videos that are popular at the time. So that's literally not what they said popular at the time because we were in the present, but you get the idea. So one of them, yeah. So I had written these, these kind of intricate scripts highlighting. I think it was like Limp Bizkit, Nookie, and Kid Rock and Corn. There was a video with Mankind, Mick Foley, trying to spot Corn in a Corn video. All these type of things, and the one I did with Dwayne, I don't even remember what the artist was, but he was like, "Wow, you really have my voice down really well." Um, at the time, The Rock only spoke in the third person, so it was like, "Yeah, you only have like the pronoun I once here in all of the pages of script that you wrote." So we really hit it off. We ended up doing a vignette together where he hit me with an "It doesn't matter." I don't know where this vignette exists. I can't find it on YouTube. That's probably for the best. And then he was like, "Hey, do you ever consider writing for WWE?" Which is something I never considered. It was so far off the grid as far as quote unquote real television was at the time. But I decided to, take him up on the offer because why not? I wasn't doing anything else. And, ultimately, I met with Vince McMahon, Shane McMahon, had all these job interviews. And I turned down the job. Vince said, "We'll make you an offer you can't refuse." And they offered me a job on WWF.com, which, wasn't anything that I was thinking about doing. Not like I've written on 3 shows. They might not be great shows. I'm not like packing up and leaving LA to write for WWF.com. No offense, WWF.com. No offense to WWE.com in the present. Just wasn't something I was interested in. And then I got hired, my writing partner and I got hired on another show, and I thought that was the end of it. And then, at a certain point, that show was wrapping up, and the 2 writers who were at WWF at the time kind of left while they were overseas on a tour, while the WWF was. And WWE called and said, "Yeah, listen, we know we offered you a job at the website. Like, can you forget all of that and come immediately to write on our television show because we have a situation." And then there was a decision to make. So I'm like, figured, well, I don't want to go through the same thing, like the same post Jenny thing again. So yeah, I took it. And that's essentially the very long version. So forgive me for this rambling of how off of Dwayne's The Rock Johnson's suggestion, I ended up at WWE.
So let's talk about what writing for the WWE was actually like at the time, because at the time there's just Monday Night Raw, right? When you start, it's Monday, or had SmackDown already started?
SmackDown had started. I started on the 6th episode of SmackDown. They're on their 5 millionth now, but it was number 6 when I started.
Right. So you're stepping into this place where it's suddenly expanded from one live show or one show a week to 2 shows a week. You've got the pay-per-views, Sunday night shows. What is it like for the writing team there at the time? Because it was only you and a couple other guys, right?
When I first started, it was just me and another writer who had just started himself, named Tommy Blacha, who I'm still friends with. He's a very funny guy. He came over from Conan, and he was always of the mindset of, "I'm going to do this for a couple months for the stories, and then I'm gone. I'm gone by WrestleMania 2000." And it was literally just the 2 of us and the McMahons. But it was a shock to the system to me because first of all, I had no idea how the process worked. I assumed that with so many hours of TV to write, when you're talking about a pay-per-view week, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Sunday Night Heat, 8 hours of TV a week, that there would be long writers meetings. And that's essentially what it is now, meeting all day in Stamford. But at the time, because it was a time of transition with the 2 previous writers leaving, and the company about to go public, it was just pure chaos, really. I was told I had an apartment in Stamford. WWF, I did it again. WWE put me up in an apartment in Stamford, moved my car across country, everything else. And I figured, all right, great. Where's the office? Where do we go in to write? And I was told, well, you don't really need to come in at all. Write your ideas down, type them up, and then fax them to Vince's office. And then you'll show up to TV on Monday and see if he uses any of them. And I'm like, oh, that's different. What about SmackDown? Should we come up with stuff for that? Well, SmackDown's all predicated on what happens on Raw. So you'll just write SmackDown morning of the show in Vince's hotel suite at like, 7 in the morning or something like that. I'm like, wow, that is truly different. And led me to wonder, why am I living in Stamford, Connecticut then if I'm never going into the office? So I subletted my apartment to the new announcer, Jonathan Coachman, who had just started, moved into New York City, which is what I always wanted to do. And I'm like, this is the life for like 3 months. Sometime in February 2000, they hired some more writers. And it was, yeah, we need to come into the office and write the show like a normal show. So
So then you get stuck doing the reverse commute.
exactly, reverse commute every Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.
So what were you? Explain to listeners what you're actually writing, because I feel like I will guess that most listeners of my show not were not avidly watching the Monday Night Wars as I was, as a teenager, whatever. You missed out. But what were you actually writing for the wrestlers and for the show in general?
So the writing is kind of twofold. There's the writing you do before you show up to TV. And when I say to TV, that's a Monday Night Raw live airing or a SmackDown taped airing, even though it's live now. It was taped back then, or a live pay-per-view. And that essentially is, you're writing out. For Raw, it was back then, it was a 2-hour show. Now it's 3. So there were 11 segments. And some of them were match segments. Some of them were promo segments, as we call them, which is just, wrestlers talking on the mic and usually physicality developing off of it. And also the overall storylines happening, because you want to have long-term storylines in addition to what's happening on the show that day. Because ultimately, you're trying to get people, again, the model has changed so much in 20 years, but at the time, you're trying to get people to buy the pay-per-view that's coming up. Now it's all streaming on Peacock. And obviously, you're still wanting people to subscribe to Peacock to watch the pay-per-view. But back then, it was all about getting the pay-per-view buys as well as maintaining the ratings on USA for Raw and UPN for SmackDown. And so during the week, you'd be pitching segments to Vince, pitching matches, pitching arcs, pitching backstage segments, in-ring segments, all that kind of thing, where you'd basically get it all down on paper. And then when you actually show up to the TV taping, that's when you really get granular and get into the weeds of it, meeting with the talent and essentially writing what they're actually going to say, because hopefully after the production meeting that afternoon, the stuff is now solidified as best as it can be as far as what the 11 segments are, and for SmackDown 10 segments. Now you actually, if it's going to be an in-ring promo, you need to get with the talent, get with the wrestlers, and actually write it, ideally with them and with their input. And that really made those TV days, Mondays and Tuesdays, just a whirlwind of heightened adrenaline, sometimes panic, because as has been said, the show doesn't go on the air because it's ready. The show goes on the air because it's 9:00. Taking the old Tina Fey SNL quote. So when we had our production meetings, we'd have them at like 11:01. I'd be the guy with the quote unquote Hollywood roots saying, usually these scripts are written sometimes months in advance, weeks in advance. The idea of showing up to TV and not knowing what is going to happen is a little terrifying when you're responsible for actually producing it and writing it. So after the production meetings would end, there was just a mad scramble because the wrestlers have their matches to go over. They're not going over that necessarily beat by beat by beat, although in some cases they are. But also all the backstage segments, especially if you look at an episode of Raw from 2000 versus 2022, there's a lot more backstage segments. And there's plenty now, but there was a little ton more back then. And sometimes we'd pre-tape them. Oftentimes we'd do them live. That was something, Dwayne always took pride in. I don't know how he did it, but whenever he had a backstage promo, and this was like 2, 3, 4-minute promos, it's not like a quick soundbite and then leaving. He always wanted to do it live. because he always fed off the energy of the crowd and like the live interaction. If they're chanting his name, he could pause and look up and that kind of thing. It just made it feel more in the moment. But we would, it really was going by the seat of our pants. And then there's the factor of if a segment that's allotted for 7 minutes goes 10 minutes heavy, and now you got to find 3 minutes to take out of another segment before it's happened. It's just really, really chaotic. And part of that it was nerve wracking, but a lot of it was like, wow, this is you don't experience this on sitcoms where it takes all day and literally all week to write to produce one. Everything, this is 2 hours. It's going on from 9 to 11:05 or whatever it is, and we get to do it all over again tomorrow, as they'd say. After we were done with Raw.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, you compare it to SNL, but it's like doing 104 SNLs a year instead of 16 or whatever the season run at SNL.
There are a lot of parallels to SNL, with the like legend overseeing it between Lorne Michaels and Vince, and the clear stars in the cast, and those who are coming up, and those who are just could be stars if they got the break kind of thing. The main difference with WWE and SNL is the fact that like at least SNL has a home base, and they're not literally traveling to two cities a week every week, 52 weeks a year. And they also have time off too. They have like whatever it is, a 20 something episode season. But that's what, we were fortunate enough to have some interaction with SNL. We had Will Forte and Kristen Wiig, Jorma Tacome, and the MacGruber cast guest hosting once. And they were pretty surprised, how things went back there, because they were assuming like, oh, how many cameras are we doing for this backstage vignette? No, just this guy. He's going to just pan a lot. I'm like, oh, and are there cue cards? No. When they go out to the ring, they'll just be reciting 20 minutes worth of material with literally no notes or cue cards or prompter or anything.
Yeah, you have a great story about SNL. We'll get to that in a second, but I want to hop back to something you mentioned, being the Hollywood guy in the wrestling room, because there's a great story at the start of your book about Wrestler's Court and the kind of culture clash that you experienced when you first showed up. I mean, it's almost kind of hilariously old-fashioned in a way. You're supposed to shake everybody's hands, look everybody in the eye, introduce yourself, which is from the sense I get from your book, was not really your modus operandi.
Yeah, I mean, it's stuff that you would on paper say, well, what the hell's this guy's problem? Of course you should shake everybody's hand and introduce yourself and look them in the eye and all that kind of thing. But, when you're, I don't know, like this kind of like introverted, really out of his element, kind of shy person in the first place, and it takes a while for me to like, warm up and, be comfortable around, a cast of, that's the other thing, versus SNL versus WWE or any show, is it's like a cast of like 40 or 50 between all the wrestlers and, managers and announcers and referees and all the other, anyone who's on the air. So yes, absolutely. Like, as a writer, as someone just starting in a company period, it was important to introduce yourself. And I introduced myself to people, but not everybody. Sometimes I would do just like the nod of recognition or, hey, how's it going? Forms of greetings that would be applauded in the post-COVID world. But back then it was considered, truly verboten to even consider not shaking everyone's hand. So I got in trouble because I was kind of perceived as being, a little bit standoffish and like, oh, big Hollywood guy here thinks he's too good to shake my hand in the locker room. And it was like, no, I'm not doing that because I'm standoffish. I'm doing that because I'm terrified. Obviously, as time wore on, it became much, much less of an issue. But yeah, I got in trouble between all of that and the fact that one of the wrestlers who I was friends with, because you warm up to people and become friends with them. And it's a whole thing in WWE because it's like the Harry Met Sally deal. Can men and women truly be friends? because the sex gets in the way. WWE is, can writers and wrestlers truly be friends, because the idea of television time gets in the way. Like, how can you truly be friends with someone if, as I was told, they're not your friends. They're quote unquote working you. They're trying to get on your good side, so you suggest them to Vince to be in segments on television, stuff like that. And I'd be like, no, we really are friends. We're the same age. We have the same interests. We like the same movies. We hang out. Like, yeah, they are working you. Trust me. So it was like that kind of a thing. And some of the wrestlers I was friends with, and I don't say think I was friends with, because we're still friends now, even though, I'm not in wrestling anymore.
For the record, we're talking about Christian and Edge
Yes.
here. The wrestlers Christian and Edge. Yeah.
Edge, was at a signing at a comic book store. Someone gave him a Flash action figure. He knew that I liked the Flash, because who doesn't? Well, I like the fictional character of the Flash. I want to point that out in 2022. And
Tricky
Yeah.
these days.
And then one of the other wrestlers, Hardcore Holly, who is this veteran, really no nonsense, extremely real life tough, in the ring tough, everything else, saw this gift giving happen. And that was his aha moment. And he reported it. And next thing I know, we have a huge show. This is 2001. This is the day after WrestleMania 17, which is always considered, this is the SmackDown after that. So it's considered one of the biggest shows of the year. And Stephanie told me, yeah, we're going to Wrestler's Court today. Report to the to one of the production meeting rooms where, again, I thought this would be a small thing. I couldn't imagine something like as stupid as someone saw me take a Flash action figure, as it was explained to me, being the impetus for this. I thought, all right. She said, get a box of pizza, get some beers, and it'll be fine. And I did that, thinking there'll be like 6 people there. And there was literally every wrestler, every producer, every agent, every seamstress, every security, every person from catering. The entire company essentially came. It was a sellout in whatever room we were in. And myself, Edge, and Christian went on trial for gift giving in exchange for television time, which is also funny because Christian really didn't have anything to do with it. He didn't give me a Flash action figure. At least I should get 2 action figures if I'm going to be put on trial in front of every single wrestler in the company.
I just want to create the mental image for people. The judge at this trial is, of course, the Undertaker. Yeah. Is he dressed as does he have like a judge smock on, or is he, just wearing a t-shirt and jeans or whatever?
He's wearing judge apparel with a old-timey English wig on the cover of the book, but in reality he was dressed normally, which, by the way, is still plenty imposing. In fact, it would have been a lot less imposing had he been dressed as a 1783 member of British Parliament, because then it would just contribute to the surrealness of it. But he was the judge. He did have a gavel, I think, though, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, if you're a judge, you got to have a gavel.
Gotta have a gavel.
And Kane, who, for those who don't know, is the devil's favorite demon, the big red monster, amongst many of his monikers. He was the bailiff standing behind me. Wasn't like, he was basically the bull from Night Court. He's not in a outfit too, and he's not wearing his mask, but he's 7 feet tall, and he's got his arms folded, and he's not exactly smiling. So that was interesting. And then JBL, John Layfield Bradshaw, who is this, let's just say, animated, loud Texan who is not afraid to speak his mind, with like long hair and like just loves beer, that kind of thing. He was the prosecutor, and the defense, for our defense was nobody. We didn't know we could. I didn't know we could defend ourselves with a lawyer, so we were defending ourselves, and that it did not go over well.
Yeah. Yeah. Kane, of course, his real name is Glenn Jacobs, mayor. I think he's still the mayor.
He just got reelected,
in Tennessee, right?
Not still Tennessee,
so, his early political experience was, sending you to wrestling jail.
I think his bailiff work is what pushed them over the edge with voters.
That's great. So, what was the breakdown like for you as kind of a newcomer between when you looked at the talent? What was the breakdown between the old school guys and like the newer school guys? Because I really feel like there's a definite difference in some of these, like hardcore Holly, and some of these other older school guys, and some of the younger guys who are coming up, essentially your age, same basic age.
Yeah, I would say back then, and this is unscientific, but I would say it would be 2/3 old school people who grew up in the business as far as starting in independence and territories and other WCW, ECW, um, and really relying on themselves more than anybody, as all wrestlers really did back then, to get themselves over. And to get over is to basically be cheered by the crowd if you're a good guy, booed by the crowd if you're a bad guy. The worst thing for a wrestler is to be met with indifference and having people go off to get snacks or go to the bathroom, or be chanting what or boring or whatever it is. Even that is a form of some sort of interaction. The worst is just dead silence, which happens. But most of these guys, like 2/3 of the locker room, they came up in an era of no writers and relying on themselves to get over, as most wrestlers did prior to the mid to late 90s. And then you had like a third who were just starting, whether it was like just being in the company for a year or two, or being in the spotlight for that amount of time. And really it was an interesting mix, because most of the take The Rock for example. He famously was not over when he started. He came up as the smiling, they call them baby faces, backstage, good guys, named Rocky Maivia, taking, the lineage of his father and grandfather into this smiling, happy baby face. And he was pushed to the moon. I mean, he won his debut match at Survivor Series at Madison Square Garden in 1996. He won the Intercontinental title a few months into his reign. And the crowd just did not care at all. In fact, it went the opposite. They started booing and chanting "Die Rocky Die" and "Rocky sucks," which I guess is one step up from indifference and silence. But it's not what you want to hear if you're a good guy. If you're a bad guy, it's perfect. It's the ideal reaction. But as a good guy, especially back then, where you were just told, just smile through it. You're not playing to the people in the stands. You're playing for the millions at home. You're a good guy. And it was just really, really awkward. So he got himself, he got hurt. He came back. He got himself over as a bad guy when he came back. And from there really took off, as you know, as a huge, huge star. So when I joined, he was already over, and he did not need any help, really. But he remembered me obviously from the MTV shoot, and his attitude was, listen, I'm over as hell, but if you can help me get even more over, then great. What do I have to lose? If it works, I improve and I get, even more stuff in my arsenal. And if it sucks, then, we stop working together, and, I'll still be over as ever. So, that's not what he literally said, but that was his attitude. And there were a lot of talents like that, which were like, listen, like Chris Jericho was another one. It's like, I don't really know who you are or what you bring to the table, but what the hell? Let's see what you got. Prove yourself, which is a challenge, I was more than happy to, take, because I felt the same way. Like, yeah, if I suck and you're not happy with what I'm giving you, then we shouldn't work together. I shouldn't work here. And then there were some talents that were just like, what is this? Why is some 16-year-old looking guy who's probably never been in a fight in his life telling me how to kick someone's ass in a promo segment? All valid, by the way. I understand where they're coming from. But, I always go back to, and I remember thinking this at the time, it's like, what do you know about, fighting and drinking and like all this type of thing? Like, you're completely unqualified for this job. And I'm like, Well, I guess I missed the part where like Michael Crichton was fighting dinosaurs, um, and yet still managed to write, multiple best-selling novels about it. Um, or Chris Carter, finding aliens before writing the X Files. It's like it's a fictional television show. I am a writer who writes fiction, uh, in this format. So
Yeah.
that's why I'm
Yeah,
here.
and you mentioned the old school guys. We talked about them a little bit. $7 has a new show coming out for Vice TV, Tales from the Territories. Right? I mean, that sounds as somebody who is kind of interested in that era of wrestling but doesn't know a ton about it, that sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's thanks. We're really, really excited about that. I mean, that's a show that we teamed up with Vice and the creators of Dark Side of the Ring. And that's sometimes how, by the way, we produce our television shows. As simple as Dwayne was posting on Instagram about some episodes of Dark Side just because he's a fan of it. Um, Same with when he was Instagramming about the Toys That Made Us, the show on Netflix, this docuseries. And I'd see his Instagram posts and be like, wow, I'm fans of those shows too. Maybe I'll meet the creators of them. Maybe we can come up with something. So for the movies, Toys That Made Us, that eventually morphed into Behind the Attraction, our show on Disney Plus. And for Tales from the Territories, yeah, that was like we were all fans of Dark Side. I took a meeting with Evan and Jason, the creators of that show, and we worked together um, with Chavo Guerrero too, who's our stunt coordinator on Young Rock, um, and like figured out like yeah, there's plenty of shows about the darkness and the dark side. Those guys have literally done it for multiple seasons. How can we tap into something else like the wild, the crazy, you know, stories from the territory days? Because before wrestling was kind of nationalized and WWF versus WCW, they were split into territories all over the country and in Canada and Mexico, everywhere. And all of these territories had their own, it was considered much, much realer by the fans back then. You had fans attacking bad guys in parking lots or even in the ring. You had, the stuff that, with the benefit of, zero social media not existing and, certain things, being much more acceptable back then as far as, well, not really acceptable. I guess if you're going to get all drugged up and take a door off a plane and be hanging on for your life, as Mad Dog Vachon was back then. I guess that was, I guess, better time to do it if you're ever going to do it in the late '70s, early '80s, or what have you, than doing it now. But so we got together with Vice. We got the legends and the people who experienced these stories to go sit in roundtables and tell us the stories like straight from their heads. And then, in this style and the spirit of Dark Side, we would basically shoot recreations of those stories. So what you'll see is, seeing the people who experience them or telling or firsthand or secondhand experience them and then actually see the stories come to life. All different territory every episode.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's really
And
cool.
again, that's October 4th, right? October 4th on Vice TV. Yep.
Yeah,
Awesome.
October 4th on Vice.
You mentioned social media, and there's a great story towards the end of your book about The Rock and John Cena kind of having legitimate beef with each other. I think in a realer way than I think a lot of people expect from wrestling. But one thing that jumped out at me in that story was Dwayne Johnson going to his Facebook page and like getting legit angry, and it made me think about how much the industry has changed with the advent of social media. I mean, you as somebody who got into it, before social media and who has kind of watched as the rise of Facebook and Reddit and Twitter and all the rest. From your perspective, how has that changed wrestling and its relationship with not only the performers but also the viewers? I mean, I feel like it's a huge sea change here.
Oh yeah, totally. It's really, in some respects, it's great that you can continue storylines and angles on social media, and that's essentially, what happened with Rock and John. John cut a promo when he was in Australia, basically saying, "Hey, I'm here. The Rock's not here," which was kind of was his, recurring theme during this exchange between him and Dwayne when they were, building their match. Somebody, and it's not like John didn't know this would happen. John is savvier than anyone, but someone caught it on their cell phone, posted on social media. Rock saw it and was like, "What the hell?" Because that specific gripe, was something that I don't think they were on the same page about. It's kind of like, yeah, I'm not there. I never said I was going to be there every week. I put in my time. I was there full time, and then I left, and now I'm coming back. What's not to understand?
For full context for
John,
everybody, I mean, this is after Dwayne Johnson has left and is becoming a movie star in Hollywood. I mean, this is what, 2010, 11? Yeah. So I mean, he was coming back to the show occasionally to do promos, but not on a week-to-week basis, like a guy like Cena.
Yeah. And, John, whether he was just wanting to continue the angle, whether he was legit hurt that, Dwayne wasn't there, he cut his promo and Dwayne saw that. And this is when he's not on TV. So he was able to use Facebook to respond back, respond in a way, probably much more realer than WWE would want it, because WWE eventually told both of them to cool it, save it for television. But, social media is, well, first of all, it's great as far as if you miss something, or if you want, especially as a writer, if you want to see instant reaction to a promo, a match, a television show, there's no shortage of feedback, as you know, on social media, good or bad. And sometimes you can't take it exactly at face value. But oftentimes, yeah, it gives you a pretty good indication of what the people are thinking, more so than when, in my days there, it would be based on the crowd reaction from people in the arena, and also based on the ratings and the minute by minutes. We'd get them to the minute and see what went up, what went down. And that's an effective way of looking at it too, but it's much more personal and intimate, with wrestlers having their multiple accounts. Becky Lynch, I think, used her account perfectly in her, WrestleMania match with Ronda Rousey and Charlotte Flair a few years back, where she was just savage on her Twitter page as far as insulting them, and always in character too. And that's one of those fine lines when you're a wrestler, as far as, needing to ask yourself, am I going to be the character that I portray on TV on my social accounts, or am I going to be my real life persona? And there's a lot of, the people who, 2/3 of the people that I started working with in 1999 would look ahead, to 2022 and say, my God, you're basically killing the business if you're a bad guy, but also showing yourself at a birthday party, or, going to the, going out to dinner or something like that, because then you become less than larger than life. You become just a, quote unquote, like a regular fan, that type of thing. And then there's the flip side of that, to be like, well, this is my life. This is my account. I'm not changing who I am just because I have a character on TV. And if anything, it gives fans a better perspective of me as a human being, and gets to know me a little bit better, and hopefully, creates empathy. Or if you're a heel, and you're doing stuff that they don't like, heat or whatever it is. So yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic. I mean, there's a part of me that, even though I was considered the new school when I started, really appreciate the old school aspects of keeping in character and keeping some kind of, mystique to your persona, even on social media. But I get it. I mean, I get wanting to post and to do all these things that are outside of the realm, because you have a finite shelf life in WWE. You're only there. I mean, some people are there for a while, but most, taking bumps is hard. Performing is hard. Like any athlete, you have like a limited amount of bumps in you, a limited amount of matches in you. So why not, do what you want while you have that, level of
If you ever want to read a story about a writer taking a bump, you got to pick up Brian's book. There's Just One Problem, True Tales from the Former One-Time 7th Most Powerful Person in the WWE. There's a very, very funny story about, a snowed out show and some downtime and some shenanigans being gotten up to. But
stuff that could never, ever, ever happen today.
Too controlled now. Just
Yeah.
one last thing on the Facebook stuff here, because it is interesting to me that again you mentioned this, but Vince McMahon was like, guys, knock it off. You got to stop this. We got it. Was he afraid of losing control of the narrative or just wasting good material? I mean, like, what was he like? We need to be doing this on TV for the crowd, not for free on Facebook or Twitter.
It's a good question. I think it really was a combination of both, because on the one hand, it was getting so personal and so, Vince, likes to be in control of his product. And this was veering out of his control, which isn't good because, when you're in charge, you want things done a certain way. You have a vision. You don't want it getting so real to the point of untenable as far as the talent wanting to work with each other. And a lot of it probably is like, hey, this is not on our show, and I don't know if this is great stuff, but I want it to be done closer to when you guys are actually going to have your match, because I think this was like months and months out, when neither of the, when Rock wasn't on TV and what have you. But yeah, I definitely think it was a combination. It was a combination of let's calm down a little bit before somebody says something that you can't take back, and let's save it for the money-making portion of our gigantic multi-million-dollar multiple WrestleMania 3-year angle. What are you guys doing?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, Vince McMahon is a recurring character in the book. Obviously, I mean, he is the guy in charge of WWE, WWF for all these years. There are lots of great little Vinceisms, as you put it, I guess, as everybody over there puts it. My favorite was one of the early ones in the book. Treat every day like it's your first. In terms of working with McMahon and and seeing what he was like in real life as opposed to on TV, as the rest of us experience him, what was that persona like? I mean, was it weird that he? The sense I get from the book, and I'm sorry I'm rambling here, but the sense I get from the book is that the backstage Vince McMahon is very much like TV McMahon, down to the like cackle laugh whenever he finds something surprisingly funny.
Vince is obviously an understatement to say a complex, interesting individual, but he really is the bittersweet symphony song, a million different people from one day to the next. At his heart, he's a performer. And when you're at TV, when you're at a TV taping, you kind of take on the persona of a performer, even when you're not on television, even if you're backstage. So if that means like running the production meeting or, having meetings with individual wrestlers, you're kind of in a performer phase because you're putting on a show, whether you're on TV or not, versus when you're at Stamford. And that's where the WWE, corporate headquarters are, and you're just meeting either one-on-one or meeting in a small group, or in Vince's case, doing board meetings or doing individual, meetings with any of the corporate officers of WWE. He's not in full Mr. McMahon mode. He's much more reserved, much more down to earth. Obviously, it was very, very important that he eat something, because he can get very angry if he's not fed. But in general, the dichotomy between Vince at TV versus Vince in Stamford was pretty noticeable, as far as and I think a lot of that has to do with just, again, that live show or even tape show energy and the let's put on a show wrestling promoter kind of overall aura and feel. Whereas, back, during the week when we're not at TV, there can be intense moments here and there, but for the most part, it was a much more grounded, relatively stable type of meetings and type of interactions where, whereas at TV, it's just fully speaking to the next level.
All right, so let's skip ahead a bit, and the Rock kind of gets you into wrestling in a weird way, in a more serious way than the MTV SummerSlam promos, but he also gets you out of wrestling in the end here, and you're now at his production company, $7. You guys you just started or are about to start taping season 3 of Young Rock, right? Which you EP. and I hear is coming back to the state, is going to be taping in the States this year, which is very exciting.
Oh, it's huge. We're shooting in Memphis starting in September with a 11/4, November 4th premiere date on Fridays. So yeah, this is something. It is ironic. I never really thought of it that way, but he brought me in and took me out is absolutely right and accurate. Because at the time he was starting his own production company and he wanted to take me with him, and it wasn't like I had indicated to him that if an opportunity like this ever arises, please let me know as soon as possible. Because, 5 years as a writer in WWE,
Yeah,
or 1 year, I should say, is like 5 years,
yeah,
I think, in Hollywood. Um, just the time and just the overall everything to it. So, after about when he had first approached me about it in 2012, it had been like 13 years or so. And I was just ready. I was ready to go. And then, I was able to finagle a deal with WWE and with $7, Dwayne and Danny, where I could work part time for both. And that lasted for like about 3 years or so. And then in 2015, he's like, "All right, we're ready to go if you are." And I'm like, "I have been ready for a long time. Let's do it." So yeah, and part of that is, it's funny because even though we're outside of WWE, Dwayne obviously is third generation wrestler. His grandfather, his grandmother was a promoter, his dad, Rocky Johnson, obviously. And I still have my WWE roots too. So even though we're producing plenty of shows that don't involve wrestling, it's still in our DNA. So we have Tales from the Territories, we have Young Rock, we have even the
yeah,
XFL has come
yeah.
back. Back when I thought in 2001 that I would never have anything to do with that football league again. But it's back in a much, much better form, one that I'm excited about. So that's good. It is not the XFL depicted in the book in the story of how it came to be and went away. But yeah, and we have other wrestling related adjacent projects in development too. So it's just something we love and something that we always are going to come back to. But it's nice that we have a pretty wide palette and plenty of other things as well.
You didn't mention it, but one that I quite enjoy is Fighting with My Family, starring Florence Pugh, produced
Yeah,
by $7. It's a good look at kind of the, I don't know, backstage real life of what it takes to become a wrestler in the big leagues. So check that out if you get a chance. Part of this. This has to do with the mainstreaming of wrestling and also the, like, not just the mainstreaming of wrestling but also the mainstreaming of wrestlers. I mean, obviously Dwayne Johnson, one of the biggest stars in the world, John Cena, one of the biggest stars in the world. How from your perspective as somebody who kind of watched all of this happen in real time, how has this come about? I mean, how has the world accepted wrestlers as, like, you can absolutely be number one biggest star in the world now?
I mean, I think a lot of it just has to do with the sheer talent of the individuals who've ascended to that level. I mean, like, obviously, the world has seen what Dwayne Johnson can do since he hosted SNL in 2000, and then embarked on his movie career. But, John Cena, Dave Bautista, like, these guys are just truly, truly super talented. And that was one of the things, that I shook my head at in the beginning of John's movie career, because he was being cast in, at the time, WWE films, The Marine and 12 Rounds. And, the movies, this is apart from the movies themselves, because that has nothing to do with it. It was just the way John was portrayed as kind of like this serious, no nonsense, action hero. Whereas in real life, we know, that Peacemaker John Cena is way closer to real life John Cena, than Marine John Cena. It just is. He's funny. He's irreverent. And Dave Batista, for instance, is like, he's soulful and, is a very, like, and also very dryly, subtly hilarious. You saw that backstage at WWE. It really wasn't, other than a couple of vignettes and lines and everything, it was never really tapped into because he was a main eventer. He was this gigantic, muscles, star, what have you. And dry humor, is really isn't one of the assets usually that a top wrestler is usually put in the forefront. But he was perfect as Drax and in Blade Runner and everything else. I think like the popularity of wrestling over the years it has gotten more mainstream. It has gotten, part of that, as much as I hated to write when we took a step back from PG-14 rating to PG, um, strategically, that was probably a good idea as far as gaining a little bit more mainstream acceptance, being able to be, taken in more by younger kids and that kind of thing, and parents letting the kids go. Um, and that kind of opened up floodgates. I mean, we have, for better or worse, I have a whole chapter about the infamous guest host era, where we went on a weird turn as far as bringing in a different Hollywood star like SNL every week to host the show. It went off the rails pretty quickly, even though there were some great episodes. But all of that, I think, contributed to a little bit more, mainstream acceptance. The fact that WWE is like now a part of Peacock and everything. Um, when I started, as popular as it was, and it was very popular. Like if you look at the advertisements during it, it was, Stacker 2 energy pills, and it wasn't the like mainstream type of advertisers or acceptance or that kind of thing. It was extraordinarily popular. But as you can just see from their TV deals nowadays, the TV deal that they get for USA and from Fox for Raw and SmackDown is gigantic compared to what it is back then, even though the ratings are much smaller with TV being segmented and streaming and everything else. It's all part of the just like kind of the mainstream acceptance of WWE and AEW on Turner and everything else. And then, yeah, when you get stars that are pretty undeniable, and like The Rock and John Cena and Batista. And by the way, there are plenty more too, that are going to be huge movie stars coming out of WWE, and dare I say AEW as well. Down the pike and over the years, it's just a matter of what role they're going to break through in doing it.
It really is key getting that first big role, or not even the first big role, the first smart role that kind of breaks them out of the mold. I mean, with The Rock, you had him in Be Cool and Southland Tales, right? Southland Tales, I'm one of 7 people on the planet who like that movie, but his performance in that like gives you a different side of him. It gives you a different humorous side. Again, with John Cena, it wasn't until Trainwreck that people were like, oh, okay, he can do something other than like the Marine or kind of Dudley Do-Right type. And Batista, Drax, obviously, but really it was that turn in Blade Runner 2049. Denis Villeneuve saw something in him, was like, okay, he can do not just big hulking guy. I mean, he does that in that role as well, but there's more to him, and
Yeah.
it's really interesting. All right, we're running long here, so I just once again I'll tell everybody, pick up the book if you love wrestling. If you want to hear stories, stories about Rowdy Piper, we haven't talked about that. As you mentioned, the XFL, the XFL chapter is hilarious. Poor Stephanie McMahon. I just felt so bad for her reading that. But pick up the book. There's just one problem. Tales from the former one-time 7th most powerful person in the WWE. Brian Gewirtz is your name. I see, I almost messed it up there. Brian Gewirtz is the name of the author. Make sure you pick it up. And I always like to close these interviews by asking if there's anything I should have asked. If there's anything you think people should know about the WWE, about the world of Hollywood, working in $7. I mean, I'm open to anything you want to tell folks.
Look, I don't really, I don't, I'm always terrible at these kind of questions because I have this almost superpower to come up with the perfect response roughly 5 minutes after we sign off and go off the air. But, as I kind of like wrap up the book, it's like just, I guess it's not really a question, but I'll just leave it with the sentiment of like, you truly, I know it's cliche to say, but you really truly never know, what the hell this life in this crazy world is going to give you. Because for me, like the last thing in the world I was ever thinking of, despite being a big fan as a kid, would be to become a wrestling writer, and never even considered, television development either. It was straight ahead sitcom. Got to do what my uncle did. Um, and then one thing leads to another, and you just you take the ride and see where it takes you, and sometimes it
Yeah.
can be pretty amazing.
Well, Brian, thank you very much for being on the show. Again, everybody go pick up the book. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. You can get a copy. And I will be back next week with another episode of The Bulwark Goes to Hollywood. See you guys then.